Ahoy! It's your boy. Today is Sunday, December 24th, and I did not really see this coming, but if you happen to hang on the edge of every word that I say and you wait with bated breath each week, then you will be receiving this on Christmas Day. So happy holidays to you, and I guess it's kind of nice when things work out that way. Not too much to get you caught up on, except, I had my wisdom teeth pulled. So, yeah, I've literally eaten scrambled eggs, mashed potatoes. I had a little bit of salmon, but I'm basically eating a soft food diet for 7 days, which I admit actually hasn't been too bad. I guess it goes to show you that I'm pretty adaptable to circumstances. Um, and what can I say? I guess when I can get back to eating regular food, that'll be an excuse to pig out on something especially delicious. So, other than that, the only thing that's really on my mind, because I sort of mentioned in passing the movie Barbie, which I happened to see, and I admit I watched a lot of movies since then. I don't want to spend too much time talking about those things because I'm going to read the second part of my honors thesis here, and it's going to take a while. So that's going to take up most of our time. So actually, now that I think about it, this may be kind of a drab and I don't know, is doleful? Is that a word? I don't know. It'd be a drab thing to listen to on Christmas Day, but hey, what can I say? Maybe anything to get away from your in-laws, perhaps. But the movie that's really on my mind last night, I watched completely unexpectedly. I had a list of a couple movies I wanted to watch, and I won't tell you what those are. But apropos of nothing, or maybe unexpectedly, I saw an ad for this film Saltburn, which maybe I had heard of. I don't know why it was kind of in the back of my mind, but I really didn't know anything about it. And so I started watching it and I was immediately sucked in. And it was one of these experiences where you're watching a movie and you just know that you're in the hands of an artist. And after about 15 minutes, I paused the film because I was this is just like out of this world. Like I just loved it. And I realized that it was made by, I think I'm getting her name right. It's Emerald Fennell or Emerald Farrell or something like that. But she made a film called Promising Young Woman, which I saw, I guess around the time it came out, or around the time that it came out for streaming or whatever. And there was something about this film where Promising Young Woman is a perfect example of this. But although I haven't really developed my thoughts on Barbie, these are two female filmmakers that are ostensibly commenting on, I don't know, the state of sex and gender and the cultural zeitgeist. And again, my thoughts are not really super defined on this, but I was like, this is a real auteurist filmmaker who has something meaningful to say about this topic versus, something, the Greta Gerwig Barbie film just seemed to be this kind of meta commentary on itself that tried to wrangle this, Barbie, this thematically into this like, I don't know, socially relevant pretzel. Again, I thought the whole movie was pretty incoherent, but I thought here's a female filmmaker who really has something meaningful and timely to say. And that's definitely present in Promising Young Woman, which I encourage you to check out. Bo Burnham happens to be in it and gives an incredible performance with a twist that I don't think most people will see coming. And but Saltburn is absolutely incredible. The male lead is actually you'll probably recognize him if you kind of watch, I don't know, maybe the more indie films or whatever. But he was the male lead, the sort of psychotic male lead, not Colin Farrell, but the sort of villain of Killing of a Sacred Deer. What's his name, Largos Yanthamos or whatever his name is. Very cool filmmaker as well. But he is just absolutely incredible in this movie. And if you're in for a movie that is potentially disturbing, a little creepy, and kind of maybe grotesque is a word I would put. There's some sexually explicit stuff. It's meant to be. It's meant to make you uncomfortable, but it's absolutely captivating, and it's one of the best movies I've seen in quite a while. So that would be my film recommendation for the week. And maybe when we return to our regularly scheduled programming next week, we'll have other sort of movie stuff to talk about, because now that I have a lot of time on my hands, that's kind of what I've been absorbed in, other than this TEFL training that I've been doing, which, they say it's at your own pace, but you have these like how do I say it? Is it like teaching plans? You have these homework assignments that you have to do, and they get graded, and you can't really move forward until they get returned to you. So I actually feel like that's kind of stifling my progress a little bit, but I'm making progress nonetheless. So maybe we'll talk more about that when we reconnect. But for now, let's get into the second part of my thesis. I'm not going to summarize things except to say that in the first part, we talked about Baumann's first principles of science. We enumerated what those are. And the second half will deal with whether or not those concepts are, sort of can be generalized to this canonical commentary on Yijing called Xici. And so that's what we will get into in the second part. So I hope you enjoy. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the second part of my honors thesis. Confusedly formed. Xici as a normative account of world genesis according to Baumann's first principles of science, part 2. Xici, commentary on the appended statements. Xici as exegesis. Xici, commentary on the appended statements, also known as Dazhuan, great commentary, is the canonical commentary that is included in the received version of Yijing, Classic of Changes, an ancient Chinese book of divination and philosophy. While Genesis, Enuma Elish, and Popol Vuh are each foundational texts which have inspired their own commentatorial traditions, Xici is itself an exegesis on the terse and enigmatic text of Yijing. As a commentary, the intelligibility of Xici relies on a cursory level of familiarity with Yijing and the broad strokes of its philosophical features. To that end, I will first survey the salient aspects of Yijing that Xici makes frequent reference to, and provide an overview of Xici themes and philosophy. A brief history of Yijing. Yijing is a multimodal visual and textual work built upon a sequence of 64 images, or gua, hexagrams, so called because they are composed of every possible permutation of 6, hexa, broken or unbroken lines drawn one on top of each other. Collectively, the hexagrams constitute a system of metonymic images which are said to represent every conceivable situation a person may find themselves in. Appended to each hexagram is a descriptive name and an accretion of commentatorial texts which elucidate their meaning. Traditionally, one consults Yijing by manipulating milfoil stalks, and the random outcome of these manipulations directs the inquirer to a specific hexagram. By reading and reflecting on the image and its text, it is believed that the inquirer is better equipped to recognize the relative good or bad fortune of their current circumstances, and will better understand how best to respond to current events and to either bring about or avoid certain outcomes. Although the actual origins of Yijing are uncertain, it is held that the received version of Yijing is a composite text whose oldest layers are rooted in China's earliest recorded history, the Shang dynasty. While Yijing was used primarily as a divinatory text from its conception through most of the Zhou dynasty, its subsequent accretion of exegetical and philosophical commentaries, some of which were later attributed to the Chinese philosopher Kongzi, Confucius, and its elevation to the study of Jing, classic, during the Western Han dynasty, led to it being regarded as a, quote, repository of profound moral and metaphysical truths. Alongside the relative academic uncertainty about Yijing's actual authorship, the history that Yijing recounts of itself is more fantastical than it is historical. Xici dedicates a portion of its text elaborating how the received version of Yijing represents the philosophical and metaphysical wisdom of Chinese culture heroes throughout the ages. Xici relates, when in ancient times Lord Fuxi ruled the world as sovereign, he looked upward and observed the images in heaven and looked downwards and observed the models that the earth provided. He observed the patterns on birds and beasts and what things were suitable for the land. Nearby, adopting them from his own person, and afar, adopting them from other things, he thereupon made the 8 trigrams in order to become thoroughly conversant with the virtues inherent in the numinous and the bright, and to classify the myriad things in terms of their true innate natures. We will return to this passage as it recalls our previous discussion of sovereignty in accounts of world genesis and the sovereign's role in encountering the existence of things and separating them according to their genius. For now, this passage establishes that, according to tradition, the building blocks of the hexagrams are 8 three-lined images, the so-called trigrams, also referred to as gua, which were originally drawn in antiquity by the legendary Lord Fuxi to express the fundamental order of the universe. Later tradition holds that the fully historical King Wen, patriarch of the Zhou dynasty, then stacked pairs of trigrams into their known hexagrams, sequenced them into their received order, the so-called King Wen sequence, and added summary statements to each to elucidate their meaning. The hexagrams would go on to serve as the models for the basic tools of civilization utilized by the sages. King Wen's son, the Duke of Zhou, later affixed mantic statements to the 6 individual lines of each hexagram, 384 in total. Finally, the various commentaries and appendices of the received texts have traditionally been attributed to Confucius. Although legendary, this account underscores that even by its adepts, Yijing is understood and read as an accretion of text which can be separated into 2 main sections. One, the earlier core Yijing comprised of the hexagrams, their appended statements, and individual line statements. And 2, the latter appended commentaries, collectively referred to as Xici, the 10 wings, of which Zhuan is one. Scholars have observed significant differences and discrepancies between these 2 sections. The earlier core is terse and enigmatic, while the latter commentaries are highly philosophical and transfigure what was originally regarded solely as a divinatory manual into a sacred text. The focus of our study, Zhuan, is possibly the most formative in this regard. However, before turning our attention to that text in detail, I will first identify the major themes of Zhuan and demonstrate something of the philosophical language it wields when commenting on Yijing. Features and philosophy of Zhuan. Zhuan was composed in the late Zhou dynasty in the 3rd century BCE and refined into its received form sometime in the Western Han. While references to Yijing divination predate it, the earliest known references to Zhuan specifically are in the Shiji historical record of Sima Qian and Sima Tan from roughly 100 CE. Although authorship of Yijing's 10 wings are traditionally attributed to Confucius, both ancient and modern scholars have conceded that the received text of Zhuan is a composite work representing the voices of more than one author and at times competing philosophies. And yet, while some interpreters have putatively assigned isolated sections of Zhuan to Taoist or Confucian editors, taken together, the received text can generously be assessed as presenting a syncretic, if not entirely consistent, philosophy. This syncretic quality to Zhuan's philosophy can, in part, be attributed to the ambitions of its authors. Zhuan offers more than a mere explication of Yijing's abstruse text. It is an account of the creation of both Yijing and the cosmos itself. Although not a narrative account of creation like Genesis, Zhuan is saturated with the philosophical language and terminology of the late Zhou and early Han, a period of syncretic cosmological thought. This syncretic quality of the language of Zhuan partly accounts for the attention it earned from latter Song dynasty Neo-Confucians, who drew heavily from the language of Zhuan in formulating the syncretic revivalist form of Confucianism that would go on to be the orthodox interpretation of the classics for nearly 1,000 years. In this prevailing interpretation, Zhuan reads Yijing as an infallible system which provides insight into the cosmic processes operating within nature and through the symmetry that exists between heaven, earth, and humankind within ourselves as well. Still, the language wielded by the authors of Zhuan assumes a level of fluency with the philosophical parlance of the period in which it was written. While a full explication of the text's philosophy is outside the scope of this essay, it will require that we frequently refer to Zhuan's own commentatorial history to elucidate its otherwise enigmatic expressions. In the study which follows, we will explore how closely this infallible system conforms to the principles outlined in Baumann's First Principles of Science. Zhuan and Baumann's First Principles of Science. Zhuan as a scientific account of creation. Before locating Baumann's First Principles of Science in the text of Zhuan, we should first demonstrate if the text qualifies as a scientific account of creation at all. Recall that science here is not understood according to its modern definition as a system of inquiry aimed at arriving at objective facts about the underlying order of nature, but as original science, that which is known through empirical observation. Joseph A. Adler asserts that although categorized as a commentary, there are actually relatively few passages of Zhuan which are formally commentatorial, and that even these are latter interpolations. Adler goes as far to say, quote, Zhuan is not a commentary on Yijing. It is a collection of statements about the Yijing and how it functions, as both an oracle and a book containing the most fundamental natural and moral principles. The Zhuan explains the Yijing's function primarily in terms of linkage, parallelism, or harmony of heaven, earth, and humanity, and how the Yijing, by means of its inherent spiritual power, allows humanity to maintain that harmony. In Adler's reading, while the text is peppered with formal commentary, its primary function is to elucidate how Yijing expresses the symmetry between the natural order of heaven and the conventional order of humankind. Moreover, he observes that, according to Zhuan's own claims, astute readers of the text gain something of the fundamental natural and moral principles which allow humanity to maintain that symmetry. Indeed, Zhuan makes many ambitious claims about the metaphysical and cosmological comprehensiveness of Yijing. Robert Smith has summarized Zhuan's assertions in this regard as follows. Yijing is, in effect, one, a microcosm of the universe, duplicating quite literally the fundamental processes and relationships occurring in nature. 2. These processes and relationships are revealed in the hexagrams, trigrams, and lines of Yijing. 3. The Yijing allows those who use it to partake of a potent, illuminating, activating, and transforming spirituality. And 4. By participating fully and sincerely in this spiritual experience, one can discern the patterns of change in the universe. Thus, one can not only know fate, but also establish fate, that is, devise an effective moral strategy for dealing with unfolding circumstances. Similar to Adler's claims, Smith observes that the authors of Zhuan interpret Yijing as an expression of the underlying order to nature revealed through the overt wisdom of the appended statements and the allegorical imagery of the hexagrams. Zhuan also asserts that those who recognize and implement Yijing's wisdom are invested with the power to sustain themselves by mitigating the potential entropy of unfolding events. As such, one who utilizes Yijing as outlined in Zhuan is invested with something of the same transforming spirituality that sustains the universe itself. In our previous readings, we observed that, according to Baumann's First Principles of Science, scientific accounts of creation enumerate the tasks of ordering the world against an ever-impinging void. Additionally, although scientific accounts of creation are allegorically expressed as a single event, the ever-impinging presence of the void requires that the conventional order is sustained through interminable maintenance and vigilance. According to Adler and Smith's readings, discerning the pattern of change in an otherwise incoherent cosmos suggests a system of order in nature that is similar to those we've observed in other accounts of creation. Moreover, both interpreters emphasize an inherent dynamism in nature, which the enlightened reader perpetually attunes to so as to maintain the harmony between heaven and earth. I contend these observations qualify Zhuan as a scientific account of creation when creation is properly understood, not as a single event, but as the perpetual ordering of the world against an otherwise undifferentiated unity. Having established that, we can begin to recapitulate Baumann's First Principles of Science and compare them against the text of Zhuan. Face the void. For Baumann, scientific accounts of Genesis begin with the acknowledgement of the void. To that end, Zhuan posits that transcending all observable phenomena is a supreme unity, or Tao. Of this Tao, Zhuan relates, the reciprocal process of yin and yang is called the Tao. That which allows the Tao to continue to operate is human goodness, and that which allows it to bring things to completion is human nature. The benevolent see it and call it benevolence, and the wise see it and call it wisdom. It functions for the common folk on a daily basis, yet they are unaware of it. This is why the Tao of the nobleman is a rare thing. It is manifested in benevolence and hidden within its functioning. It arouses the myriad things but does not share the anxieties of the sages. As replete virtue and great enterprise, the Tao is indeed perfect. It is because the Tao exists in such rich abundance that we refer to it as great enterprise. It is because the Tao brings renewal day after day that we refer to it here as replete virtue. In its capacity to produce and reproduce, we call it change. When it forms images, we call it qian. When it duplicates patterns, we call it kun. The means to know the future through mastery of the numbers is referred to as prognostication, and to keep in step freely with change is referred to as the way one should act. What the yin and yang do not allow us to plumb, we call the numinous. This passage demonstrates how Zhuan wields the philosophical language of the time period without explication. Still, we can generally summarize the thrust of this passage as follows. From the undifferentiated Tao arise two polar forces, yin and yang, whose alternations give rise to the myriad things of the phenomenal world. A latter passage in Zhuan affirms this reading. Quote, therefore, what is prior to physical form pertains to the Tao, and what is subsequent to physical form pertains to concrete objects, the phenomenal world. End quote. The Tao precedes the manifestation of concrete objects. Richard John Lynn, the author of the English translations of Zhuan used throughout this essay, interpolates his translation with the commentary of Han Kangbo, who further characterizes Tao as a name for non-being. It is that which pervades everything, and it is that from which everything derives. The Tao, then, is a conventional name given to an ineffable something that precedes the being or creation of things. Zhuan further posits that while the Tao is hidden in all things and imbues them with their distinguishing forms and characteristics, the Tao itself is formless. The ineffability and formlessness of the Tao is what earns it Han Kangbo's epithet of the numinous. He elaborates, the numinous refers to the expression used to address the myriad things in terms of their subtlety and as something for which it is impossible to formulate questions. I once tried to discuss it this way. Absolutely everything just undergoes transformation in the great void and all of a sudden comes into existence spontaneously. As we do not understand why all this is so, how much less can we understand what the numinous is? And it takes the perfect void to respond perfectly to things. We equate this with the Tao. As it takes the complete lack of conscious thought to view things from the point of the mysterious, we call this the numinous. One who takes the Tao as resource and so achieves union with it derives his power to do so from the numinous, but is himself more dark-like than is the numinous. According to Han Kangbo's conception, the Tao is manifest in creation through transformation or change, the alternation of yin and yang. In its undifferentiated state, however, the Tao exists as non-being, a state which, like the Tao itself, can be posited, but not fully comprehended. Zhuan itself argues that although the Tao animates all of creation, its transcendent nature means that its presence goes unacknowledged by most people. Even the sage, or nobleman, who variously recognizes the Tao as benevolence, wisdom, and virtue, can only dimly intuit the nature of the supreme Tao. Similarly, Han Kangbo offers that the numinousness of the Tao is its non-beingness, ultimately equating the Tao with great and perfect void. This characterization of the Tao as a formless, dark-like, and mysterious state preceding creation recalls the primordial waters in Genesis, Enuma Elish, and Popol Vuh. In Zhuan, however, this undifferentiated wellspring of creation is figured as the Tao. Fix a point of reference. Having acknowledged the void, the creation of spatial and temporal order from the undifferentiated unity begins with fixing a point of reference. In doing so, Zhuan sets out by drawing a distinction between heaven and earth. The opening lines of Zhuan read, "As heaven is high and noble and earth is low and humble, so it is that Tian and Kun are defined. The high and the low being thereby set out, the exalted and the mean have their places accordingly. There are norms for action and repose, which are determined by whether hardness or softness is involved. Those with regular tendencies gather according to kind, and things divide up according to group. So it is that good fortune and misfortune occur. In heaven, this process creates images, and on earth it creates physical forms. This is how change and transformation manifest themselves." Again, while the meaning of the philosophical language in this passage is not always intuitive, it is apparent from the outset that Zhuan begins by enumerating a litany of binary concepts: heaven, earth, high, low, noble, humble, tian, kun, exalted, mean, action, repose, hardness, softness, good fortune, misfortune, images, physical forms, and change, transformation. We have already observed that apparent change and transformation are the manifestations of the alternation between two primordial forces, yin and yang, which arise from the undifferentiated unity of Tao. This fundamental binary is the organizing principle that the authors of Zhuan order the world by. Although yin and yang are simultaneously present in all things, because they only obtain equal measure in the undifferentiated Tao, all observable phenomena can be classified as yin or yang based on the predominance of one force over the other. The Zhuan passage above indexes how this universal dualism is expressed by the first two hexagrams of Yijing, Tian, pure yang, hexagram 1, and Kun, pure yin, hexagram 2. The subsequent binaries in this passage can therefore be parsed according to these two categories. Yang is heaven, high, noble, tian, exalted, action, hardness, good fortune, images, and change. Yin is earth, low, humble, kun, mean, repose, softness, misfortune, physical forms, and transformation. Although not a single point, it is this overarching dualism that Richard Wilhelm identifies as Zhuan's fixing a point of reference in the creation of order against the undifferentiated void. For Wilhelm, if change and transformation are the means by which the numinous Tao is manifested in the phenomenal world, non-change, like Han Kangbo's characterization of the Tao as non-being, is the point of reference against which the phenomenal world is recognized. In his commentary to the above passage in Zhuan, Wilhelm elaborates, "Non-change is the background, as it were, against which change is made possible. For in regard to any change, there must be some fixed point to which the change can be referred. Otherwise, there can be no definite order, and everything is dissolved in chaotic movement. This point of reference must be established, and this always requires a choice and a decision. It makes possible a system of coordinates into which everything else can be fitted. Consequently, at the beginning of the world, as at the beginning of thought, there is the decision, the fixing of a point of reference. Theoretically, any point of reference is possible. The ultimate frame of reference for all that changes is the non-changing." While Genesis and other scientific accounts of creation identify a creative event as the fixing of a first point of reference, Wilhelm and Han Kangbo observed that Zhuan identifies a negation of observable phenomena as a first point of reference. This could be endemic to a text which explicates the natural order from the perspective of humankind. Although we will observe that Zhuan is not without allegory, unlike Genesis, Enuma Elish, and Popol Vuh, which recount creation in a way that is overtly fantastical, Xici deconstructs the phenomenal world to arrive at the underlying order beneath it, beginning with what is empirical and reasoning backwards toward what must precede it. In the same way Hong Kong Bo identifies non-being as antecedent to the differentiation of things, Wilhelm posits non-change as a preceding first point, against which apparent change and transformation can be recognized. Moreover, Wilhelm's assertion that fixing this point makes possible a system of coordinates into which everything else can be recognized affirms Baumann's assertion that fixing a point of reference is fundamental to constructing a conventional spatial and temporal order. Assume the center. In the course of fixing a point of reference, we assume the center. Recall that assume in this context implies both the presumption or convention of centrality in the midst of the void, and also assumption in the sense of taking centrality upon oneself. Wilhelm has already underscored the infinite number of available points to choose from in the midst of an undifferentiated unity. And yet, as with Baumann's hypothetical example of falling through the ice, arbitrary does not mean inconsequential. In the same way someone who has fallen through the ice depends on locating the hole they fell through to survive, Wilhelm asserts that it is critical for readers of Xici to identify non-change as the first point of reference if they intend to construct a conventional order that accords with the order of heaven. Although any point of reference is theoretically possible, he argues, quote, experience teaches that at the dawn of consciousness one stands already enclosed within definite prepotent systems of relationships. The problem then is to choose one's point of reference so it coincides with the point of reference of cosmic events. For only then can the world created by one's decision escape being dashed to pieces against prepotent systems of relationships with which it would otherwise come into conflict. Wilhelm's injunction that a conventional order which does not accord with the prepotent systems inherent in nature is in danger of being dashed to pieces evokes the same threat encountered by Christopher McCandless in The True Wilderness of Alaska and the same hazards that await the residents of New York City should they ever stop attending to the ever-impinging deluge threatening their subway system. With respect to the ever-looming threat of the void, Xici cautions, to get into danger is a matter of thinking one's position secure. To become ruined is a matter of thinking one's continuance protected. To fall into disorder is a matter of thinking one's order enduring. Therefore, the noble man, when secure, does not forget danger. When enjoying continuance, does not forget ruin. When maintaining order, does not forget disorder. This is the way his person is kept secure and his state remains protected. While the prepotent systems of the Tao are knowable to one who is up to the task, there is an inherent dynamism to their changes and transformations which the noble man attunes to and adjusts themselves to accordingly. Xici counsels that, although humankind assumes, takes upon themselves, the center by fixing an arbitrary point of reference in the undifferentiated Tao, they cannot assume, take for granted, that overcoming the void ensures their security in perpetuity, since continuance depends on responding to the Tao's transformations. Additionally, Xici highlights how humankind's assumption of centrality in the natural order is figuratively expressed in the hexagrams of Yijing. In the commentary's second section, which deals with the hexagrams and text of Yijing more granularly, Xici reports, as a book, The Changes is something which is broad and great, complete in every way. There is the Tao of heaven in it, the Tao of man in it, and the Tao of earth in it. It brings these three powers together and then doubles them. This is the reason for there being 6 lines. What these 6 lines embody are nothing other than the Tao of the 3 powers. Xici establishes that part of I Ching's repleteness is the way it accurately figures humankind's place in the cosmos relative to heaven and earth. The Song Dynasty Neo-Confucian Xici, in his own commentary on I Ching, Zhou Yi Ben Yi, the original meaning of the Zhou changes, explains that, with respect to the hexagrams, quote, we take the upper 2 lines as heaven, the middle 2 lines as humanity, and the lower 2 lines as earth, end quote. When consulting the hexagrams and attending to the individual line statements, Zhuan and Xi's commentary on it conclude that, schematically, the two central lines of each hexagram figuratively represent the abode of humankind, which resides literally and figuratively between the abodes of heaven and earth. This schema is also attested to with respect to the structure of the three-line trigrams and another of Yijing's appended commentaries, Shuo Gua Zhuan, explanation of the trigrams, with the top line of the trigram representing heaven, the middle line representing humankind, and the bottom line representing earth. Zhuan asserts that this structure is doubled in the hexagrams and reflected in the appended line statements, which comprise yet another of Yijing's 10 wings, Xiangzhuan, commentary on the images. A survey of all the appended line statements in Yijing does not always bear this claim out, or else requires very liberal interpretation to do so. Still, this arrangement is very clearly expressed in the line statements of Yijing's first hexagram, Qian, whose line commentary reads, "A submerged dragon does not act. The yang force is below. There appears a dragon in the fields. The operation of virtue spreads widely. He makes earnest efforts throughout the day. Whether going back up or coming back down is a matter of the Tao. Hesitating to leap, it still stays in the depths. When it advances, there will be no blame. When a flying dragon is in the sky, a great man takes charge. A dragon that overreaches should have cause for regret. When something is at the full, it cannot last long." Although Yijing's prognostications are ultimately all concerned with humankind, we can recognize the motivic development of the line commentary's imagery gradually moving from the abode of earth up to heaven. In the first two lines, the dragon is first submerged within the earth, then appears on its surface in the field. The imagery of the third and fourth lines, the abode of humankind, are focused on human labors and even seem to suggest that humankind, despite their ambitions potentially, is circumscribed from reaching the heights of heaven above them. Finally, the top two lines depict a dragon that is in the sky, the abode of heaven, perhaps too high in the final analysis. In short, Zhuan represents humankind's assumption of the center in the process of world genesis as the fixing of an arbitrary point of reference in the undifferentiated void, and by the figurative depiction of humankind's central position relative to heaven and earth in the lines of the trigrams and hexagrams. No time. In assuming the center, humankind occupies a position relative to the rest of the phenomenal world in the natural order. It is through this relative positioning that humankind knows time. Again, Baumann's first principles of science privileges the definition that understands time as an occasion of relative stillness in a world of flux. Returning to the opening lines of Zhuan quoted above, apparent change and transformation are the manifestation of the alternation of yin and yang. However, the predominance of one force over another in the myriad things of the phenomenal world is enumerated by a list of binary characteristics. One item of the list reads, "There are norms for action and repose which are determined by whether hardness or softness is involved." The binaries Dong and Jing, which Lin elects to translate as action and repose, have been translated elsewhere as movement and rest. Although the difference may appear subtle, Lin's choice has an anthropocentric quality, which foregrounds Zhuan's role as a commentatorial text addressed to the reader of Yijing. Action is something one does. Its use here anticipates the participation of a human actor that has not been suggested by the text, who, prompted by the prognostication they encounter in Yijing possibly, will choose how to act in response to their current situation. Movement and rest, however, describe the empirical state of a thing. These terms are not only more consistent with the other universally applicable characteristics enumerated in this passage, they better express the relativity of these two terms. In the same way Hong Kong Bo and Wilhelm assert that being and change are the background against which non-being and non-change are made possible, movement and rest are only established relative to one another. While these are descriptors of human action also, in its opening passage, Zhuan is setting out universal characteristics that adhere in all things, which can ultimately be traced back to the alternation of yin and yang. For this reason, Jesse Chapman, in his translation, reaffirms Zhuan's intention to correlate movement and stillness, for our purpose the best translation yet of Jing, with yin and yang by re-injecting these terms back into the passage, along with the fundamental manifestations of each in the phenomenal world, heaven and earth. His translation reads, quote, "The movement of heaven and the stillness of earth are constant, and so the firmness of yang and the suppleness of yin can be clearly determined." Although Chapman's clarity is accomplished by taking some liberties with the original text, his translation alerts us to how movement and rest are figured in the hexagrams of Yijing. In his commentary to this passage, Xici explains, quote, "Movement is the norm of yang, stillness is the norm of yin. Firm and yielding are what we call the yin and the yang of the hexagram lines of Yijing." End quote. Xici's explanation of this passage draws our attention to two terms we have yet to explore in the original passage above, gang and ro. We have seen these terms variously translated above as hardness and softness, firmness and suppleness, or firm and yielding. All are possible provided we understand, per Xici's comment, that they refer to the yang, unbroken, and yin, broken lines of the hexagrams. This observation anticipates our discussion of allegory and how Yijing uses the changing lines of the hexagrams to express the flux of the phenomenal world. With respect to the discussion of time, however, recall Baumann's assertion, "The perfect way to tell time is with light," which he suggests is best accomplished through the use of a gnomon. In that example, Baumann reports that the gnomon reckons time as the occasion of an observer in a moment of relative stillness relative to the light of the sun. In the same way Baumann prescribes the gnomon as a tool to occasion stillness relative to the light of celestial bodies, Jishi's commentary clarifies Zhuan's prescription of Yijing as the means by which humankind can reckon time as an occasion of relative stillness within the apparently random flux of yin and yang. Wilhelm explains how this is accomplished as follows. In the heavens, constant movement and constant change prevail. On earth, fixed and apparent lasting conditions are to be observed. On close scrutiny, this is only delusion. In the philosophy of Yijing, nothing is regarded as being absolutely at rest. Rest is merely an intermediate state of movement, or latent movement. However, there are points at which the movement becomes visible. This is symbolized by the fact that the hexagrams are built up of both firm and yielding lines. The firm, the strong, is designated as the principle of movement, the yielding as the principle of rest. The firm is represented by an undivided line, the yielding by a divided line. Wilhelm's explanation elucidates how the prognostications of Yijing gain their potency according to Zhuan's conception. From humankind's perspective, judging by the unpredictability of events and the random movements of celestial bodies in heaven, the phenomenal world is a world of flux. However, Yijing reckons time through the hexagrams which, like the gnomon, express occasions of relative stillness and the alternations of yin and yang. According to Zhuan, in the same way the spinning ballerina experiences relative stillness by remaining in time with a fixed point, the nobleman also reckons time and brings order to the apparent flux of the phenomenal world by attuning to the primary forces underlying its natural order, yin and yang, which are expressed by the firm and yielding lines of the hexagrams. Observe the horizon. Alongside the construction of temporal order is the construction of spatial order. In the Hebrew account of Genesis, this ordering begins with God establishing a dome in heaven and separating the waters of heaven and earth. It is no accident that Zhuan also begins by discriminating between heaven and earth. Drawing again from Zhuan's opening lines, the text reads, quote, "As heaven is high and noble and earth is low and humble, so it is that Qian and Kun are defined." Zhuan sets out by expressing that just as heaven and earth are the fundamental manifestation of the primary forces of yin and yang in the phenomenal world, Qian and Kun are the fundamental expressions of those forces in Yijing. As with the separation of the primordial waters in Genesis, this division cleaves an otherwise undifferentiated unity into two realms, the abode of humankind and the abode of heavenly bodies. A latter passage in Zhuan also identifies the establishment of heaven and earth as the prerequisite for the construction of spatial order. Quote, with heaven and earth having their positions thus fixed, change operates in their midst. End quote. This passage spells out that this bifurcation of the void fixes the boundaries of heaven and earth. Having fixed the boundaries of each, these realms can be populated with the myriad things of the phenomenal world. Encounter the existence of things. Zhuan spends a significant portion of its text encountering the myriad things of the phenomenal world. This is first expressed in the distinction between two classes of things, xiang, images, and xing, form. Again, drawing on a section of Zhuan's opening lines above, the text reads, quote, in heaven, this process creates images, and on earth it creates physical forms. This is how change and transformation manifest themselves. In Hong Kong Bo's assessment, images here are equivalent to the sun, moon, and the stars, and physical forms here are equivalent to the mountains, the lakes, and the shrubs and trees. Like Genesis, which treats the creation of the lights in the dome of the sky and the earth putting forth vegetation separately, Zhuan distinguishes between the characteristic things of heaven and earth, drawing our attention to the myriad things in broad categories first, before separating them with greater specificity according to their qualities. Separate one thing from another according to its genius. Having established broad categories, Zhuan asserts that things of similar character are sorted according to their inherent qualities. This is the process indicated above, by which the things of heaven and earth can be identified as either images or form. The text reads, quote, things with regular tendencies gather according to kind, and things divide up according to group. End quote. In Zhuan, this is true both of the things of the phenomenal world, as well as their figuration in the hexagrams of Yijing. Recall again the passage above in which Lord Fuxi encounters the existence of things and, according to their innate natures, authors the trigrams to serve as models for civilization. Quote, when in ancient times Lord Fuxi ruled the world as sovereign, he looked upward and observed the images in heaven, and looked downwards and observed the models that the earth provided. He observed the patterns on birds and beasts and what things were suitable for the land. Nearby, adopting them from his own person, and afar, adopting them from other things, he thereupon made the 8 trigrams in order to become thoroughly conversant with the virtues inherent in the numinous and the bright, and to classify the myriad things in terms of their true, innate natures. Just as Baumann concludes that the being of a thing comes into existence when we know their essential character, Lord Fuxi functions like the sovereign creators of Genesis, Enuma Elish, and Popol Vuh in classifying the myriad things of the phenomenal world in terms of their true innate natures. Reify the genius of things with logos. An enduring distinction between the type of cosmogony outlined in Zhuan and other accounts of creation is that while the culture heroes identified in Zhuan are certainly sages and invested with something of the same spiritual power which emanates from the Tao, they do not, like God, Marduk, and plumed serpent, exist prior to creation. The culture heroes of Zhuan do not call forth creation, but enumerate and explicate it. Still, while they are not responsible for the creation of the cosmos at large, Zhuan credits Lord Fuxi and others with the creation of the conventional order of civilization, which is itself modeled on the same natural order as heaven. They reified the genius or inherent qualities of things by recognizing the patterns of nature in them. Zhuan itemizes a long list of things which are modeled by the sages after the heavenly pattern expressed in the trigrams and hexagrams of Yijing. Lord Fuxi tied cords together and made various kinds of snare nets for catching animals and fish. He probably got the idea for this from the hexagram Li. After Lord Fuxi perished, Lord Shengnong applied himself to things. He hewed wood and made plowshares, and bent wood and made a blow handle. The benefit of plowing and hoeing he taught to the world. He probably got the idea for this from the hexagram E. He had midday become market time, had the people of the world gather, had the goods of the world brought together, had these exchanged, had them then retire to their homes, and enabled each one to get what he should. He probably got the idea for this from the hexagram Shi. After Lord Shenong perished, the Lord Yellow Emperor Lord Yao and Lord Shun applied themselves to things. They allowed things to undergo the free flow of change, and so spared the common folk from weariness and sloth. With their numinous powers, they transformed things and had the common folk adapt to them. The Yellow Emperor, Yao, and Shun let their robes hang loosely down, yet the world was well governed. They probably got the idea for this from the hexagram Qian and Kun. They hollowed out some tree trunks to make board and whittled down others to make paddles. The benefit of boats and paddles was such that one could cross over to where it had been impossible to go. This allowed faraway places to be reached, so benefited the entire world. They probably got the idea for this from the hexagram Huan. They domesticated the ox and harnessed the horse to conveyances. This allowed heavy loads to be pulled and faraway places to be reached, and so benefited the entire world. They probably got the idea for this from the hexagram Sui. They had gates doubled, and how watchmen's clappers struck and so made provision against robbers. They probably got the idea for this from the hexagram Yu. They cut tree trunks to make bows and whittled others to make arrows. The benefits of bow and arrows were such that they dominated the world. They probably got the idea for this from the hexagram Kui. In remote antiquity, caverns were dwellings, and the open country was a place to stay. The sages of later ages had these exchanged for proper houses, putting a ridgepole at the top and rafters below in order to protect against the wind and rain. They probably got the idea for this from the hexagram Dazhuang. In antiquity, for burying the dead, people wrapped them thickly with firewood and buried them out in the wilds, where they neither made grave mounds nor planted trees. For the period of mourning, there were no definite amount of time. The sages of latter ages had this exchanged for inner and outer coffins. They probably got the idea for this from the hexagram Daguo. In remote antiquity, people knotted cords to keep things in order. The sages of latter ages had these exchanged for written tallies, and by means of these, all the various officials were kept in order, and the myriad folk were supervised. They probably got the idea for this from the hexagram Kwai. This itemization correlates a number of hexagrams with the foundational tools of civilization and emphasizes that the sages were able to draw on the images of the hexagrams for their inspiration through their numinous powers, the same spiritual force which is inherent in the hexagrams also. Additionally, while Genesis formulates the reification of things with the pattern God said X, there was X, Zhuan roughly schematizes a similar process according to the formula Sage did X, its benefits were Y, which they probably took from Z hexagram. Although the sages do not call forth the created world per se, this process represents the sovereignty of the sages and their ability to recognize the pattern of heavenly order in the hexagrams and author the tools of civilization after them. This conception seems to emphasize action over words compared to other scientific accounts of creation, and yet Zhuan asserts the efficacy of the sovereign's words also. Quote, "The noble man might stay in his chambers, but if the words he speaks are about goodness, even those from more than 1,000 li away will respond with approval to him, and how much the more will those who are nearby do so? If he stays in his chambers and his words are not about goodness, then those from more than 1,000 li away will go against him, and how much the more will those who are nearby? Words go forth from one's person and are bestowed on the people. Actions start in what is near and are seen far away. Words and actions are the door hinge and crossbow trigger of the noble man. Words and actions are the means by which the noble man moves heaven and earth. So how could one ever fail to pay careful heed to them?" The capacity of the sages of Zhuan to establish order through their words and actions is comparable to the creator sovereigns of Genesis, Enuma Elish, and Popol Vuh. The order they reify in Zhuan is both the conventional order of the human realm, the institutional and technological order of civilization, and the heavenly order that is figured in the hexagrams of Yijing. Establish the four directions, the four seasons, and thereby a firmament. Syncing the 4 points of the compass with the 4 seasons, and thereby constructing a firmament, is figuratively expressed in Zhuan, which provides a summary of the cosmological model of the phenomenal world and alludes to resources outside of the text which would have been known to readers of that time period. The text recounts, "Therefore, in change there is the great ultimate. This is what generates the two modes. The two basic modes generate the 4 basic images, and the 4 basic images generate the 8 trigrams. The 8 trigrams determine good fortune and misfortune, and good fortune and misfortune generate the great enterprise. Therefore, of things that serve as models for images, none are greater than heaven and earth. Of things involving the free flow of change, none is greater than the 4 seasons. Of images that are suspended above and emit brightness, none are greater than the sun and the moon. Therefore, heaven produced numinous things, and the sages regarded these as ruling principles. Heaven and earth changed and transformed, and the sages regarded these as models. Heaven hung images in the sky and revealed good fortune and bad, and the sages regarded these as meaningful signs. The Yellow River brought forth a diagram, and the Luo River brought forth writing, and the sages regarded these things also as ruling principles. In the changes, there are the 4 basic images. It is by means of these that it makes its revelations." The passage begins by tracing a progression from void to fundamental forces, beginning with Taiji, Great Ultimate, another term for the Tao as the undifferentiated unity that precedes the creation of the phenomenal world, which gives rise to the 2 basic modes, or yin and yang, the primary forces that are inherent in all things. Newly established here is how these 2 forces give rise to the 4 basic images, which then give rise to the already encountered trigrams, the 8 building blocks of Yijing's 64 hexagrams. We have observed that yin and yang are figured as the broken and unbroken lines of the hexagrams. The trigrams are every possible permutation of these lines in sets of 3. The 4 basic images are therefore understood as the interstitial arrangement of these lines in pairs and have been correlated to the 4 points of the compass and the 4 seasons. Zhuan contextualizes this otherwise esoteric enumeration of philosophical and cosmological terms by referencing the Yellow River diagram and the Luo River chart, 2 representations of the cosmological order which would have been known to the readers of Zhuan around the time of its authorship. Tradition held that the Yellow River map appeared on the back of a dragon that emerged from the Yellow River. It depicts the complex correlation of many aspects of cosmology and numerology. It pairs odd numbers with the yang forces and even numbers with the yin force. We also see these numbers correlated to the points of the compass and to the 8 trigrams. Each point of the compass is also synced with the 4 seasons. Finally, we are introduced to the so-called 5 agents or 5 phases: earth, metal, water, wood, and fire, which are believed to be generated by the alternations of yin and yang and proceed upon each other in a predetermined sequence. In the Yellow River map, these 5 agents are also correlated to each of the trigrams, points of the compass, and to the 4 seasons. While we have already encountered the assertion of the phenomenal world representing the manifestation of the alternation of yin and yang, this chart expresses how that conception was scaffolded by positing other fundamental elements that arise from them. In the same way, all observable phenomena were categorized as characteristically yin or yang, according to their observable qualities, which signaled the predominance of one force over another. So too were things categorized according to the 5 agents, which represented further gradations on the same continuum, with water, wood, and earth being associated with yang, and fire and metal being associated with yin. As in Zhuan, the Yellow River map is often referenced in tandem with the Luo River writing, a magic square which depicts the 5 agents in conjunction with strings of even and odd numbers, themselves visually correlated with yin and yang in the form of white and black circles, in which any row, vertical, horizontal, or diagonal, of 3 sets of numbers adds up to 15. Robert Smith notes that while these 2 documents are referenced in the Zhou and Han periods, there are currently no known examples of them in the form depicted here prior to the 10th century. Consequently, while it cannot be known if this is the exact sequence of correlations Zhuan has in mind when it evokes these documents, what can be reasonably inferred is that Zhuan justifies its conception of spatial and temporal order by referencing these traditional documents, which did link the 4 directions with the 4 seasons in some fashion. We observed earlier through the text of Enuma Elish how this syncing of the 4 points with the 4 seasons renders Baumann's figurative tent of the created world, which represents the construction of spatial and temporal order. In that text, the netting of Tiamat by the creator sovereign Marduk depicts the dome of the sky being draped over the tent pole-like colliers that emanate from the compass points and thereby establishes a firmament. Similarly, Zhuan establishes spatial and temporal order by correlating the 4 compass points with the 4 directions and constructs a firmament, the abode of celestial bodies, from them. In the passage above, Zhuan indicates twice that the images hung or suspended in heaven are regarded as signs by the sages, who, observing the precession and relative positions in time, come to know the underlying order of nature. Zhuan concludes this passage by emphasizing that this natural order is fundamentally expressed in the construction of Yijing itself, which is only capable of making its revelations by virtue of the fact that its order accords with heaven. Observe the symmetry between heaven and earth, born of light. We have already observed that Zhuan is different from other accounts of creation in that the creator sovereigns of Genesis, Enuma Elish, and Popol Vuh exist outside of the establishment of conventional order. Zhuan, on the other hand, begins with the conventional order as it exists and reasons back from what is empirical to what must have preceded it. Still, while Zhuan does not have a prototypical creator sovereign per se, it details a list of sage kings who established the conventional order of the political world in symmetry with the operations of heaven. We have observed that Zhuan traces a lineage of sovereigns including Lord Fuxi, Lord Shengnong, Lord Yellow Emperor, Lord Yao, and Lord Shun, who invent the tools of civilization by modeling them after the heavenly order expressed in the hexagrams of Yijing. Therefore, the political order they create sustains because its order accords with the spiritual power of heaven. More importantly, however, while Zhuan expresses the empirical symmetry between the order of heaven and earth, the ultimate expression of the symmetry between heaven and earth is represented by the existence of Yijing itself, which is believed to contain the entire cosmos within its pages. The text explains, Yijing is a paradigm of heaven and earth, and so it shows how one can fill in and pull together the Tao of heaven and earth. Looking up, we use it to observe the configuration of heaven, and looking down, we use it to examine the patterns of earth. Thus we understand the reasons underlying what is hidden and what is clear. We trace things back to their origins, and then turn back to their ends. Thus we understand the axiom of life and death. As a sage resembles heaven and earth, he does not go against them. He perfectly emanates the transformation of heaven and earth, and so does not transgress them. He follows every twist and turn of the myriad things, and so deals with them without omission. He has a thorough grasp of the Tao of day and night, and so is knowing. Thus the numinous is not restricted to place, and Yijing is not restricted in form. This passage explicitly states that the symmetry between the configuration of heaven and the patterns of earth are expressed in Yijing. Moreover, it lends greater detail to Adler's earlier observation that Zhuan extols Yijing as an expression of the parallelism between heaven and earth, and that those who approach the text seriously are invested, like the earlier sage kings, with the power to maintain that harmony. In that sense, while Genesis, Enuma Elish, and Popol Vuh may provide illustrative examples of creator sovereigns which rulers of the communities who venerate those texts may or may not model themselves after, Zhuan makes the explicit claim that its exegesis of Yijing provides the blueprint for would-be sages and sovereigns of the conventional political order who hope to emulate the cultural heroes illustrated in its history. Therefore, while the final act of creation in Genesis is God's establishing a symmetry between the political orders of heaven and earth by creating humankind in his own image, there is a sense in which the final act of creation by the worldly sovereigns illustrated in Zhuan is the authorship of Yijing, effectively providing future sages with the instruction manual for modeling themselves in the political world after the natural order of heaven. Express knowledge of that order through allegory. Baumann asserts that despite the fantastical language or setting of scientific accounts of creation, the complex imagery wielded in these stories always points back to something empirical. As we've observed, the primary function of Zhuan is the elucidation of the relatively terse and abstruse text of Yijing, which the authors of Zhuan read as an allegorical expression of the natural order. This is made explicit in the text, which reads, "The sages had the means to perceive the mysteries of the world, and drawing comparisons to them with analogous things, made images out of those things that seemed appropriate. This is why these are called images." Despite the esoteric appearance of the images, or hexagram, Zhuan assures us that they are analogous to the things of the phenomenal world. While this is true of the hexagrams, Zhuan also concedes that the line statements appended to the hexagrams can pose a formidable challenge to interpreters, but that they can be understood with proper explication. Quote, "These line phrases speak to the most mysterious things in the world, and yet one may not feel aversion towards them. They speak to the things in the world that are the most fraught with activity, and yet one may not feel confused about them." End quote. As we observed in the first part of this essay, allegory does not explicate, it simply mirrors. Also, the meaning of allegorical tropes are not universal, but specific to the culture and the time period that authors them. Therefore, Zhuan, understanding that accurate interpretation of Yijing's allegory requires explanation, offers a detailed account of the line statements to a selection of Yijing hexagrams to demonstrate how this system of allegorical expressions functions throughout the text. Our earliest example of the spiritual power of the sovereign's words comes from Zhuan's elucidation of the line statements of hexagram 61, Zhang Fu, Inner Trust. In context, the full quote reads, "A calling crane is in the shadows. Its young answers it. I have a fine goblet. I will share it with you." The master said, "The noble man might stay in his chambers, but if the words he speaks are about goodness, even those from more than 1,000 li away will respond with approval to him, and how much the more will those who are nearby do so? If he stays in his chambers and his words are not about goodness, then those from more than 1,000 li away will go against him, and how much the more will those who are nearby do so? Words go forth from one's person and are bestowed on the people. Actions start in what is near and are seen far away. Words and actions are the door hinge and crossbow trigger of the nobleman. It is the opening of this door or the release of this trigger that controls the differences between honor and disgrace. Words and actions are the means by which the nobleman moves heaven and earth. So how could one ever fail to pay careful heed to them?" Here we see how the relatively clear explanation of the words and actions of the sages actually exists in conjunction with the comparatively esoteric imagery of the line statement of hexagram 61, which correlates the image of a calling crane and its young with the gift of a fine goblet. This passage demonstrates that the authors of Zhuan understood the temporally and culturally specific meaning of allegory, and that without their commentary, the meaning of this line statement would have been challenging, even to interpreters living at the same time period as the authors of Zhuan. In another example, Zhuan explains, "First yin of Da Guo, major superiority, hexagram 28, says, 'Use white rushes for a mat, and one will be without blame.' The master said, 'Even if one were to place things on the ground, it would indeed be permissible. So if one were to provide matting for it with rushes, how could there possibly be any blame attached to that? This is the extreme of caution. As things, rushes are insignificant, but their use can be very significant. If one makes caution a technique of this order and subsequently sets out to deal with things, such a one will never experience loss. This explanation not only elucidates the otherwise obscure reference to the white rushes, it also demonstrates how one encountering this line statement in the course of prognosticating with Yijing would apply the line statement in their assessment of their current situation, and consequently would exercise caution in whatever course of action they take in response. Finally, returning to one of the line statements outlined above from hexagram 1, Qian, Zhuan explains, a dragon that overreaches should have cause for regret. The master said, one might be noble yet lack the position, might be lofty yet lack the subjects, and might have worthy men in subordinate position who yet will not assist him. If such a one acts with all this being so, he will have cause for regret. Earlier, we observed how the Xiangzhan commentary explains this line statement as, when something is at the full, it cannot last long. And yet, Zhuan reads the prognostication as suggesting someone in a noble position who lacks the proper support needed to carry out the work they desire. What both of these readings hinge on, however, is the word hui, regret, with its obviously negative and non-allegorical connotations. While they diverge in specifics, these differing interpretations confirm that the authors of Zhuan and other commentaries have long recognized the hexagrams and the text of Yijing as an allegorical expression of the natural order of the phenomenal world by the sages who authored them. Summary. In many ways, Zhuan is unique compared to the other accounts of scientific creation we've looked at so far. While Genesis, Enuma Elish, and Popol Vuh are foundational texts which have inspired their own exegetical and commentatorial traditions, Zhuan is itself an exegesis of Yijing, which it regards and in many ways refigured as a sacred text. Moreover, while other accounts of creation figure creation occurring at the hand of creator sovereigns which exist outside of and precede the creation they author, Zhuan begins with the observable phenomena of the created world and reasons back to the conditions and forces which must have given rise to it, ultimately regarding the authorship of Yijing by the former sages as the fullest expression of the underlying order of heaven. Still, despite these differences, we have observed how Zhuan, in conjunction with Yijing and with the aid of Zhuan's own commentatorial tradition, conforms to the same first principles of science as other scientific accounts of creation. In acknowledgement of the void, Zhuan posits an undifferentiated unity, or Tao, which precedes creation. In fixing a point of reference, Zhuan asserts that the Tao gives rise to the primary forces of yin and yang, whose alternations manifest the apparent change and transformation of the phenomenal world. Wilhelm and Han Kang-bo have both observed that this initial differentiation of the unity into being from non-being and the establishment of change against the background of non-change exemplify the fixing of a point of reference in the process of creation. In fixing a point of reference, Zhuan demonstrates how humankind assumes centrality, and that this centrality is also figuratively depicted in the arrangement of the lines in the trigrams and hexagrams of Yijing. In assuming the center, Zhuan also knows time as an occasion of stillness relative to the light of celestial bodies. Zhuan asserts that, in the same way the gnomon reckons time by occasioning moments of stillness between an observer and the light of the sun, Yijing allows the inquisitor to reckon time as occasions of stillness relative to the cosmic forces of yin and yang, whose alternations are knowable and undergird the apparent randomness of unfolding events. Zhuan observes the horizon in fixing the boundaries of heaven and earth, and encounters the existence of things by distinguishing between the images, celestial bodies, which are suspended in heaven, and the physical forms of the things of the earth. While these are first identified in broad categories, Zhuan separates things according to their genius initially through the actions of Lord Fuxi, who begins the work of differentiating things according to their innate natures. The genius of the myriad things is reified through Logos by the sage kings who are invested with the spiritual power to order the world through their words and actions. By referencing the cosmological order depicted in the Yellow River map and Luo River writing, Zhuan establishes a firmament by syncing the four directions with the four seasons. Finally, Zhuan identifies the authorship of Yijing a microcosm unto itself, as the ultimate expression of the symmetry between heaven and earth, and recognizes allegory as the ultimate expression of original science, which Zhuan spends a significant portion of its text explicating. Conclusion. While I have demonstrated that Zhuan conforms to Baumann's first principles of science, I anticipate criticism from scholars who might balk at Baumann's claim that this theory generalizes to all scientific accounts of creation for two reasons. First, I expect that few modern scholars would accept Baumann's differentiation between original and modern science. In my experience, it is more common for modern scholars to posit a progression of scientific inquiry beginning, at the bad end, with early accounts of creation and advancing through history until we arrive at the foundations of modern science, Newtonian physics, Einstein's theory of relativity, Darwinian evolution, quantum mechanics, string theory, etc. However, if we accept that scientific accounts of creation like those we've observed, Genesis, Enuma Elish, Popol Vuh, and Xici, are scientific in the original sense Baumann prioritizes, then we must appreciate that the science they relate is a culturally specific expression of the empirical phenomena of the natural world. Because we lack the allegorical literacy of the authors of these accounts, we do not recognize their precise, objective, and empirical language, and misconstrue it as personification, metaphor, or symbolism, which is subjective, abstract, and open to interpretation. Rather than a method of inquiry that arrives at objective facts about the natural world, Baumann's first principles of science elucidate how different communities separated by time and space have ordered the world in the face of the void. While their specifics are a matter of religion, which is conventional and culturally specific, the science that underlies them is universal. As Baumann puts it, the science necessary to create a world is timeless. It never changes, not for anyone, anywhere, ever. Peoples face the void, fix a point of reference, assume the center, know time and space, observe the horizon, separate out one thing from another by its genius, and so on again and again and again. We know the science of Genesis is timeless because we know the conventional order is not. We are confident in the veracity of Weismann's account of the inevitable decay of our constructed environment in the absence of humankind because the created world is impermanent. Recall again Baumann's characterization of the void as ever looming and ever impinging. Although expressed allegorically, Marduk's netting of Tiamat is as empirically real and necessary for maintaining the conventional order as the 752 hydraulic pumps which prevent New York City from reverting back into the primordial waters, literally, of the void. Baumann puts this point poignantly when he says, "Worlds are degenerate. They deteriorate and decline. The created world is like a car, perfect in the showroom, but the moment you drive it off the lot, it begins to depreciate. So, the created world is perfect in the moment of Genesis, but no sooner does it start to turn than it begins to break down. The created world must therefore be maintained. Created order must constantly be shored up lest the ever-looming presence of the void reduce it to nothing. The world is like a garment, perfect off the rack, but after you wear it well, you have to patch it and mend it lest it fall to pieces. So, at the moment of Genesis, the stars in the heavenly matrix precisely indicate the times and places ascribed to them, but over time lose their way. At their inception, calendars mark the order to the sky quite accurately, but immediately thereafter must intermittently be tinkered with lest temporal order go astray. The world is like a house. You have to keep the roof up, or you'll be living in the great outdoors." An allegorical reference of my own to underscore this point is the Greek story of Atlas. In Greek mythology, after a failed attempt to overthrow the gods of Olympus, Atlas is punished by being forced to hold the globe of the earth on his shoulders for eternity. He is later approached by the hero Hercules, who asks for the Titan's help in accomplishing one of his 12 labors. Atlas, knowing that he is doomed to carry the globe until someone elects to take it from him, sees an opportunity to alleviate his suffering. While Hercules agrees to hold the world for Atlas while he accomplishes this favor, he tricks Atlas into shouldering the world again by asking him to hold it briefly while he adjusts his garments. As soon as he does, Hercules makes his escape, leaving Atlas, to this day presumably, bearing the world resentfully. The ancient Greeks knew that sustaining the created world is an interminable task, and expressed this knowledge through the allegorical image of Atlas. I contend that there are parallels in the fates of Atlas and Christopher McCandless as depicted in the 2007 film Into the Wild. Both recognize themselves as subjects in a world authored by the genius or sovereignty of someone else. However, in seeking to create an alternative world of their own, they learned something about the harsh reality of the void and the science required to overcome it. Upon encountering true wilderness, McCandless learned, like Atlas, that anyone who willfully takes up the task of shouldering the world bears that responsibility forever. Second, I anticipate that even if scholars accept Baumann's differentiation between original and modern science, many will disavow the claim that his theory generalizes to all accounts of creation due to an overapplication of cultural relativism and cultural specificity. In my experience, modern academics shudder at the prospect of a white Western academic presuming to know what non white ancient peoples believed about the world. A white scholar deigning to offer a definitive interpretation of the cosmological expression of a non Western culture is commonly construed as an act of colonialism. While I am sympathetic to this criticism, I am personally skeptical of its broad application. Moreover, Baumann himself concedes that there are intrinsic biases and limitations to his theory that qualify its general applicability without invalidating it entirely. At the outset of his course, Baumann addresses this directly. As it is, our course has a certain bias to it. It privileges Occidental tradition, the heaven of Western civilization, over the Oriental, the heaven of Eastern civilization. Bias also exists in this course due to time constraints, limits to my knowledge, my weaknesses and failings, and so on. Although Baumann acknowledges the perceived limitations of his own perspective, I also assert that Baumann is participating in an intellectual tradition that needs to be located outside the shifting strictures of modern academia's moralism. This does not mean that Baumann's theory is immune to criticism, but that his work continues a type of intellectual discourse that is exemplified in the Tao Te Ching passage that opens this paper. As we observed, the language in that passage foregrounds the dichotomy between the narrators presuming to know something about the state of nature before creation while also emphasizing the limits of their understanding with respect to the same subject. To my mind, Baumann approximates the ambitions of the narrator of that passage in attempting to posit something about the nature of the underlying science and accounts of world creation, while also acknowledging the inherent limitations of language, which make what they are attempting to convey so difficult to express. And yet there is something of Baumann's theory which also situates him alongside the authors of Zhuan as well. While the authors of Genesis, Enuma Elish, and Popol Vuh narrate the acts of creation itself, Baumann, like the authors of Zhuan and the narrator of Tao Te Ching, postulates from within the already created world and reasons backwards to the order they conclude must precede it based on their empirical observations. The authors of Zhuan use Yijing as the lens for their cosmological account. The narrator of Tao Te Ching probes their own intuition to articulate what seems empirically true, though difficult to express, about the nature of the void. Likewise, Baumann uses the available corpus of accounts of creation to posit the principles that appear to undergird them all. Rather than softening the sincerity of his claims, I interpret Baumann's acknowledgement of the limits of his knowledge and his own weaknesses and failings as a gesture of intellectual honesty within the framework of a hypothesis that recognizes, like the narrator of Tao Te Ching, both the ambitiousness of its own claims and the inherent limits of language to express it. Indeed, the narrator of Tao Te Ching underscores that there is a way in which the confused formation of the void informs the way it is confusedly expressed. Similarly, and again without being immune to criticism, any enduring ambivalence about the veracity of Baumann's theory might be attributable to the fact that it explicates the creation of conventional order from the same undifferentiated and confusedly formed unity as that which is illustrated in Tao Te Ching. While the narrator of that passage gives it the makeshift name of the Great, Baumann styles it as the Void, and the makeshift means that sovereigns across accounts of world creation have used to establish a conventional order against its ever-impinging presence are enumerated in Baumann's first principles of science. And there you have it. That's my honors thesis. Again, I feel like my throat is completely cashed. I couldn't read more if I wanted to. And given the length that this has gone, I doubt very highly that you'll want to hear anymore. So if you sat through both parts of this, I hope you enjoyed it. I know it's not I don't know. It's potentially a little bit dry, and I admit there's a lot of verbiage in there that I think is a little bit challenging. I bet on the written page it's actually a little easier to comprehend, frankly. But nonetheless, it's recorded here for posterity. And I'm sure this is a subject that, even though this is the best enumeration or sort of expression of my thinking on this topic to date, I'm sure this is a subject I'll return to over and over and over again, and probably something that will come up over and over again in our conversations, for better or worse. So rather than keep you longer, I'll just say this. I think we may be connecting one more time before the new year. Even if we don't, it's not that big of a deal. I'll just wish you, for now, a happy holidays and stay safe. And I hope that this time in the season is restorative. And I'll look forward to reconnecting with everyone soon. So thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. And ciao for now.